Hey everybody, Nick and Oscar here. Okay, so life has been wildly busy for the past few months, and if you've been to this channel before, you know that it's basically a diary of the process of me making my first feature film. Well, that feature is now complete, and the first trailer is public. If you haven't seen that, definitely go watch it. It'll be relevant to our discussion today. Why? Well, as many of you know, I have a deep and abiding obsession with lenses. To be fair, you might say that I'm obsessed with equipment more generally, but perhaps lenses more than anything else. For our feature, we used the Zelmus Apollo anamorphic lenses and the DZOFilm Arles spherical primes. I've been a big fan of the base set of Arles lenses since they were first introduced. I own the A set as well as the 14mm ultra wide, and I use these things all the time. They're my favorite spherical lenses ever. They're clean, they're sharp, they're amazingly fast, but they're also just a little bit warm and just a little bit forgiving. They're just timeless lenses, and I have no doubt that they will remain my go-to set for the foreseeable future. The movie I just finished is called The Game of Life. We shot about half the movie on the Arles primes, and I could not be happier with that decision. Most of the time, if I'm planning to shoot something more serious, the first question I ask is whether there's a reason not to shoot on Arles. They're usually my default choice unless there's a particular reason to shoot on something else. This summer, DZOFilm announced a special set of tuned Arles lenses called Lustre. They take the exact same optical formula, housing, and mechanics, but they feature a very interesting gold/copper coating on a number of the lens elements, resulting in some dramatic and interesting changes to the image. The other day, I was pleasantly surprised to get an email from DZOFilm saying that they had a demo kit of Arles Lustre lenses, which had just become available, and asking whether I'd like to take a look at them. Yes, please. So today we are going to look at what makes Lustre what it is, how I might use or not use these lenses compared to the base set, and whether I'm going to be adding these to my kit as well. So let's take a look. But before we do, a heads up that this was not a paid review. I don't get to keep these lenses. It was just a situation where I get to borrow them, check them out, and send them back. I didn't sign any document whatsoever. I have no obligations to do or say anything about them. I don't even have to make this video, but I want to because I'm really interested in these lenses and exploring how they differ from the incredible base set that I bought myself and have really loved using. Okay, let's get cracking. The first thing I notice when I look at the Arles Lustre footage is just how much like the base set it really is. It's a very similar overall look, and that makes sense given that the optical formula is identical across the sets. The only difference here is in the golden coatings. So the overall look and performance will be really similar, but there are a couple of key differences. We're going to start with the smallest differences and work our way up to the bigger ones. First is illumination. Where all of the lenses are basically f1.3 across the board, the base set achieves t1.4 illumination. This is because very little light is lost. The careful blue coatings preserve really good transmission and even field illumination, less vignetting. The Lustre set uses these wild golden coatings, which suck in a bit more light. So the Lustre set loses about 1/3 of a stop just in the coatings. So they're about t1.6. Again, the optical formula is still f1.3 or so, meaning your depth of field, your bokeh, etc., it will all be the same, but the image will be a tiny bit darker for an equivalent f number. That's why we use T numbers in cinema to begin with to ensure consistent exposure when changing lenses. So that's the illumination difference, which, as I say, is minor. The big differences come when we get to color. The original base Arles lenses use a very subtle blue coating. It's like this pale blue color, and it results in a neutral but slightly warm image. Minimal lens flares, minimal veiling glare, both of which tend toward the blue side of the spectrum in the same direction as the coating. Lustre, on the other hand, uses this very intense coating in the copper gold color. That results in exactly the opposite effects from what we got with the base set's subtle blue. Instead of a slightly warm image, we get a very cool image. It's about 1500 degrees Kelvin or so below that of the base set. So if we take a look at these two shots side by side, one of them I shot on the base Arles and one of them I shot on the Lustre, and if we look at them just straight out of camera, you can notice one is much cooler. But if I bump the color temperature in RAW of the Lustre image by about 1500 degrees Kelvin, we get colors which are pretty close to one another. Not exactly the same, but close. And that's just for our average shot that does not have a lot of backlighting. Because the other thing that that heavy gold coating does is that it invites a ton of lens flare and veiling glare rather than minimizing them. And that flare and glare behavior skews extremely warm rather than skewing cool. So if we're in a backlit situation, the Lustre lenses produce a much warmer image than the base set, like several thousand degrees Kelvin warmer. And you get all kinds of flare elements which are not necessarily always predictable. So what does that mean from a practical perspective? Well, there's an aspect of using the Lustre lenses which tends to remind me a little bit of using my Zelmus Apollo anamorphic set. They're very different sets overall, but they both have this kind of wild flare and veiling glare characteristic that you have to be mindful of. Those things can have a significant impact on your shot, and not always in a way that you expect. That's kind of what happens with lens flares generally, and why they have traditionally been considered a defect. They tend to have a kind of behavior that's not sufficiently explained with footage of someone shining a flashlight into a camera. They're complex and subtle characteristics which can change a lot depending on your circumstance. Sometimes it'll result in the most beautiful accident you can imagine, and sometimes it's not exactly what you were looking for. Most of the time it's a lot of fun and something you can use to your advantage as long as you're aware of it. As I mentioned, I shot half my film on the Arles primes, the base set, and the other half on those Zelmus Apollo anamorphics I just mentioned. I chose the Zelmus lenses specifically because I wanted those wild and unexpected things to happen. I was shining lights at the camera all the time specifically to provoke those kind of accidents. And if I had a set of Lustre lenses instead of the Apollos, there definitely would have been times when that would have made sense for this film. They take what I love about the Arles, the punchy, modern, very refined, but still forgiving image, and put them into a new package which just gives you a bit more personality to work with when you want it. The one thing to watch out for is color matching. If you're using a set of Arles Lustre lenses, you may have a difficult time matching your footage to another set of lenses, specifically when lens flare or backlighting behavior comes into play. And even more especially if your shot goes from a non-flaring or non-backlighting situation to one with flares or backlight. Your colors can suddenly go all over the place in a way that other lenses simply aren't going to replicate. A good colorist can minimize that kind of thing, but my advice is that if you're shooting on Lustre, just shoot on Lustre and don't loop in too many other things for that particular scene or group of shots. Then again, this is your party, don't let me tell you what to do, but that's how I would do it. My favorite use case for this look is when you have a very strong point source somewhere in the background, like the setting sun in particular can produce just this insane set of flare elements that I just drool over. Golden hour on these lenses is something else. It just results in one of the most beautiful spherical flare structures I've ever seen. And by structure, I mean the number of flare elements, their shape, their relative sizes and distances. It's just so lovely. And it's in this really striking golden color, which is very particular and very cool. This is again where I'll plug cineflares.com. It's a service run by Marcus Forderer, ASC. He is an A-level cinematographer who has shot multiple $200+ million movies. And one of his personal projects is cineflares.com, which is the largest repository of lens flare information on the planet and being continuously updated. I don't have any affiliation with Marcus or the service. I'm a customer of that service and I just love it. And I think more people should know about it. Arles Lustre isn't in his database yet, but there are literally hundreds of lenses in the database from ARRI to Zeiss, from Panavision to Pentax, and everything in between. It's a really fantastic way to look at flare behavior in a controlled environment. But zooming out just a little bit, what do I think is the broader use case for these lenses? Did I buy a set? Well, no, I haven't bought one yet. For me personally, if I'm going for a wild, aberrant, what some describe as an organic image, I will often turn to my Zelmus Apollo anamorphics. Again, they are very different from the Lustres, but that's usually where I go. And then if I want a clean, modern image, very clear separation, mushy backgrounds, I'll head for Arles. Or if I need to go mobile and pack light, then there's the Chimera C or the new Vespid 2 lenses. I'll have more on the Vespid 2s soon. They're absolutely incredible and kind of basically like a mini Arles. The Lustres would be a very enticing option if I didn't already own both the Arles and Apollo sets. If I had nothing at all, I would definitely consider them. So someone looking to get into cine lens purchases for the first time, you know, maybe you get a couple of Vespid 2s as sort of a clean base set. Maybe you add 1 or 2 lusters for those wild characteristics. I know a couple of you in the comments have wondered about just that kind of combination. I think committing to just these lenses, if you were new to cinema lenses generally, it could be an interesting direction to take, but it could come with a steep learning curve. It's hard enough to learn how to use ordinary glass when it's clean, and adding the complications of a highly flare-prone setup might make it harder. My thought is that these will become a really popular rental option. I could see really wanting to do a specific project with this look, and having access to the whole set for a whole project could be really nice. I imagine the ultra-wides like the 14 and the 21 with this kind of flare behavior could be really interesting for certain shots. But even just the 4 lenses in the kit that I got to test from 25 to 75, they really do represent something special. One last thing to note is that I think shooting on something like this really benefits from shooting in RAW if you have availability to do so. The reason being that these kind of flare elements are going to skew really far in terms of the color gamut. You're getting extremely saturated flare elements, and if you're shooting in a more compressed format, you can end up going to out of gamut errors and end up with things that don't look quite right, or colors that are more saturated than you wanted. So having the flexibility to shoot in RAW, ensuring that you're gathering all the camera's data, including its widest possible color gamut, is helpful. So I find that shooting on the Raptor here in RAW is a better use case for these than shooting on like a little mirrorless in a compressed XFAVC format or something like that. So just something to consider. Anyway, I think that's going to be all for today. Let me know if you have any other questions about these. Otherwise, go check out my trailer, please. Link is in the comment. Leave me a comment on the trailer so I know you were there, or tell me what you think about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.